So stick with me on this. A couple weeks ago, we did an episode on The Shining, rewatching The Shining in theaters, and the conclusion I came to, surprising everyone in the audience, is The Shining was actually a Faustus retelling.
I do remember that. How could I forget?
I'd never thought about it before, and I would never do something so simple again, just a few weeks later.
I gotta say, pause. That was one of your more convincing ones for me.
Why, thank you.
I always appreciate and admire when you dive into that sort of analysis with another story. It's always interesting, and I never like doubting you. But sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a bit of a stretch. That one I really admired and liked a lot.
So going into this rewatch of The Lighthouse, The Shining was on my mind. There's such iconography, there's such thematic depth in that film. You can chew on it forever. The public consciousness has been chewing on that story for 50 years.
Right. Well, and a big theme for both of these movies is isolation, and like that's hugely present for both of them.
It's a lot of it. The big realization I had watching The Lighthouse is not that The Lighthouse is Faustus. There's like an A to B to C.
Okay.
The Lighthouse is The Shining. And
Which
The
is
Shining
Faustus.
is Faustus. So we'll get there. But I think you can immediately draw a parallel between The Lighthouse and The Shining.
Cool.
They both take place in a single remote location, beset by crazy weather. The explicit themes and text is all about frustrated masculinity and alcoholism and a guy running around with an axe.
And also, like, some unknown horrors and terrors about what happened to the person in the previous position, or the same position previously, excuse me.
And those horrors are only ever gestured at.
Yes.
They're not really shown. There's kind of a possession element.
And we get some surreal imagery and dream stuff happening and supernatural things.
And The Lighthouse, it never really explains itself in the same way The Shining doesn't give you the answers you really want.
Right.
But The Lighthouse doubles down because there are two guys embodying this frustrated masculinity. There are two guys who are struggling with alcoholism. There are two guys running around with axes. So I think there is a lot that tracks from The Shining, which also means, as we talked about a few weeks ago, there's a lot of Faustus stuff in there too. But to just talk about The Shining, I love that one of the key reveals in The Shining, where Wendy picks up the manuscript and sees the all work and no play, that reveal happens in The Lighthouse.
Oh, he picks up the book.
The way it's transformed is fascinating because that manuscript turns into Tom's book and all of these bad reports on Winslow, which are more or less the same complaint listed over and over and over again for pages.
Sure.
In the same way you have that refrain in the manuscript. And Winslow reacts to this by saying, "Are you trying to ruin me?" And that's what made me think that there was some meat on the bone, something we could really talk about here, because there is one huge difference between The Lighthouse and The Shining. When Wendy finds the manuscript in The Shining, Jack is already too far gone.
Right.
Right? That is lights out. That is confirmation that he's been gone for a while.
Yeah, it's confirmation. That's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's different in The Lighthouse because that ruination, that book, that report on Winslow's performance that will get back to the higher up and deny him his pay and ruin his career, that hasn't happened yet. It's imminent.
True.
It's still within his control possibly to prevent or avert that. So his ruination is kind of a live wire.
I see.
And I think that active sense, instead of things already being settled and screwed, they're still kind of up in the air. I think that idea resonates throughout the rest of The Lighthouse. Because if we pull it back to that kind of Faustus comparison, instead of these two characters, Tom and Winslow, mapping cleanly onto the Faustus roles, I think it's much more dynamic than that. I think these roles and power dynamics are still in play. It's not as simple as saying one of them is the Faustus character, one of them is the Mephistopheles character.
Yeah.
The archetypes do not map cleanly onto these two guys because the whole story of The Lighthouse is these constant reversals of roles, of identities, these revelations of identity in past lives. Who's holding the axe and chasing the other guy? Who is spilling their beans? These identity shifts. What is your real name? Who's Tom? Who's Tom at this moment? And who's the dog? All of these things are reversed constantly. There are some classic Faustus elements here. There is one character who's bound by a contract with a defined time limit.
True, yeah.
And I think that positioned Winslow as our initial Faustus character, right?
Yeah, especially because we're mostly in his POV.
Yes.
He's like mostly our main character, the way that Dr. Faustus is our main character.
And when you find Faustus at the beginning of the play, I've talked about this before, but we always try to, get people up to speed a little bit. He's the aged theologian who feels there's nothing left to learn in his field. There's no more book to read. There's nothing else to learn about the religion, so you need to summon a demon and, get confirmation. You need
Sure.
that sort of divine, forbidden insight and wisdom because the character is at the end of his rope. Similarly, Winslow is sort of despondent. He doesn't feel like he has any prospects or future, so he's taking too big a gamble. But instead of seeking divine truth like Faustus was, Winslow is chasing this more secular idea of success and fulfillment, where we've talked about this before, where he wants, the cottage in the woods and no one can tell me what for.
Yeah, right.
And that's what he's after. But the anchor that motivates all of this is secular success, money and peace and quiet and all these kind of simple bread and butter issues. So his demon, his Mephistopheles, the person who will give him that, is his boss. So
okay.
Tom is our initial Mephistopheles character. And as the story progresses, it almost accidentally backs into the supernatural stuff. You start getting these Lovecraftian gestures.
Well, I was going to say, he eventually does, our Faustus Winslow does want to pursue that divine knowledge. That's what drives him crazy. That's what makes him go off the rails. Is
Right.
He wants to understand, but his demon, Mephistopheles, Tom, won't let him. He won't let him up into the top level of the Lighthouse. He can't fully understand this supernatural knowledge that he wants to have.
But things start very meat and potatoes, very secular, where basically our initial understanding of Tom, Willem Dafoe, is that he is Winslow, but 20 years later.
Right.
Where he's just has the experience, but he's in this job. So we see these guys as sort of equals with varying degrees of experience, which in the Faustus framework would mean we've got two Faustuses and no Mephistopheles. But the thing that happens throughout the first 3/4 of the movie is this slow elevation of Tom, of Willem Dafoe, into this Mephistopheles.
I see.
It's not just that he has the better job working the light, seems more fun in a fucking lighthouse.
Sure.
It's that he has this knowledge. He has this divine access. There's something in the light. Oh shit, he has tentacles. He's got all the barnacles on him. He's like King Triton. There is this inflation of Tom to become our first Mephistopheles character. He grows into that mythology. And then the sort of coup that happens right towards the end of the film, in the finale, is that Winslow jumps. He tries to leap past Tom.
Yes.
And in that reversal, he forces his way to becoming the Mephistopheles character, the one who's in control, and he demotes Tom. We see how that falls into the iconography of the dog.
Yes.
Right, where he
yes.
forces Tom to walk around on all fours with the leash. And he starts talking like Tom. He starts embodying and kind of play acting this role of the Mephistopheles.
You could even see him like putting Willem Dafoe in the grave, putting Tom in
Yes.
the grave as like sending him down to hell instead, rather than himself.
But it doesn't quite track. Like it doesn't fit. This new outfit doesn't fit him properly.
Right.
He's an uneasy Mephistopheles.
Well, and it also doesn't work. Like
Exactly.
him being trapped in the grave, because he comes back out and then he tries to kill him with an axe.
So when Winslow tries to be the Mephistopheles instead of the young Faustus, he fails pretty instantly.
Yeah.
But the thing that really, the test he cannot pass is when he ascends the tower and looks into the light.
Yes.
And that it's such a gesture. It is such a non-explained metaphor, image, whatever you want to make of it or bring to it. That's how you can understand the light. Eggers does not tip his hand at all in
No.
explaining what happens when Winslow looks into the light. But Faustus does. I think that when Winslow looks into the light, this is an evolution of what happens in the play, where after the contract is signed, Faustus sees this parade of the 7 deadly sins. And that is part of this divine knowledge that he's finally getting confirmed.
Oh, okay.
I think Winslow looking into the light when he's play acting as this up-jumped Mephistopheles, I think that is a concentrated blast of that sin and divine revelation. And you see, as his, skeleton pops out of his body like a cartoon, it's way more than he can handle.
Yes.
And he falls from that perch. He falls down the lighthouse, and that's where he's demoted. Back from being this up-jumped Mephistopheles, he falls all the way back to Faustus level.
Yeah, down to the terrestrial realm,
Yes.
to Earth. Yeah.
And if you look at the way the play ends, if you look at the way Dr. Faustus ends, Faustus is dragged down back to hell. So you have that literally, where him being dragged down through this, vertical
gravity.
structure.
Yeah.
But also the way Satan is in one scene of Dr. Faustus. He's a gesture. He's not this like ongoing character. He's not the demon who makes the deal.
Yes,
he's this elevated figure who we never really get a full glimpse of. The film's version of Satan is this peripheral gesture of the bird.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say it was like the whatever kraken creature tentacles you get a glimpse of.
Maybe. Either way, it's these animals on the periphery.
I see.
But the birds are the ones who enforce the rules and restore the natural order of things.
That's true.
By punishing Winslow and ripping out his eyes and that whole beautiful tableau that the film ends on.
That's true.
They punish him for this attempted coup, and they trap him in this final shot. The birds trap Winslow, or, bringing him back to Faustus level. They trap him in a cycle of endless suffering. And thus fulfill the Faustus terms of dragging him down to hell.
Sure. Okay. I like that.
And this is where we pivot back to The Shining. Because by doing this final reversion with your central character, whether it is Jack Torrance, whether it is Winslow, by dragging them back to this failing Faustus role, that image of Winslow on the beach with his eyes plucked out, just stuck forever, kind of frozen, that's where Jack Torrance ends, in the cold, frozen solid, in this beautiful, almost wink and a nod to the ninth circle of hell.
Yes, absolutely. And even then, the final shot of The Shining is a zoom in on that photograph, which shows Jack in this impossible situation where he's in a photo from the 1920s, demonstrating that not only is he's not just dead, he didn't just die out in the maze and he froze to death. His soul, his essence, is still trapped in the Overlook forever, along with all the other ones. The way that Winslow is trapped in that eternal suffering, the way that Faustus is trapped in hell for eternity. So that all works together really well. That's fun. I really like that comparison and that analysis. I think it's really interesting. I like the A to B to C thing you've constructed there. I think that works really well. I think it helps me understand the relationship between Winslow and Tommy better. It helps me understand the ending a little bit better, because it is so like it's going one way and then it's another way and then it's another way. So I think that helps me make sense of it a bit more. Again, even if Eggers wasn't thinking about The Shining or Faustus or, both of them, it's still an interesting lens to view it from. I really like that.
There's definitely Faustus within the Robert Eggers canon. I mean, The Witch is
it's
pretty
literally a deal
cut.
with the devil.
It's almost too simple for me to dive into. That one's right there in the page.
I'll be interested to hear how you break down The Witch when we do talk about it.
Yes, we'll be doing that in the next few weeks as we cover the rest of Robert Eggers' films before Nosferatu comes out. But we've done a lot of Faustus stuff this year.
We have.
We talked about The Substance. We obviously talked about The Shining a few weeks ago. And before that, a couple months back, we talked about Longlegs.
Oh, yeah.
We did a full Faustus digression there and a few more. So those are back in the back catalog you can jump into. Obviously, we've covered a lot more horror, and there's more horror to come through the rest of the year. All of that is on podcast platforms and YouTube. Of course, on Fridays, we've been going chapter by chapter through Game of Thrones. Over on Patreon, you can get a whole cavalcade of bonus episodes, including tons of horror.
Lots of
That's
horror.
been a lot of our horror, from Maggie reading Salem's Lot to us talking about a billion other movies that couldn't fit in our regular schedule, to the Roundup series, The Breakfast Buffet, that pretty much always has at least a few horror movies in that.
Usually, yeah.
So
we see every horror movie that comes out, pretty much. Almost every single one.
Yeah.
So
thank you very much for joining us, for the support on Patreon, for the support for this series, for the unabashed enthusiasm for Nosferatu. I mean, I think that's carrying us all through the end of this year.
I'm so excited. I can't tell you how disappointed I will be if it doesn't live up to my incredibly high expectations. I feel like all of my happiness is dependent on this movie. So no pressure,
No
Rob.
pressure.
But yeah, make it happen. Cool. Let us know what you thought of The Lighthouse, what you think of Robert Eggers, what you're excited to, to see from Nosferatu, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week with another brand new episode.